Hello, welcome to this short lecture introducing you to secondary mortgage markets, the first step in our coverage of commercial mortgage-backed securities. It's very important before continuing on with this series of lectures to understand how debt works in commercial real estate, where it sits on the capital stack, and how borrowers are able to acquire debt from lenders and how those lenders underwrite and the skills involved in underwriting real estate that is used as collateral. So we're introduced to a dilemma here. So a lot of us like the position of debt on the capital stack. It receives the first rights to any income earned from the property and has the rights of foreclosure, making it a less risky asset. So there are big pots of capital in our capital markets that really seek low-risk fixed income securities. And for example, pension funds, we'll talk about them later on. So they would like to invest in commercial real estate debt. They would like to own the right to receive the payments from borrowers. Now, if your dream is to do something similar, you need to be as big as these pension funds. You need to have hundreds of millions of dollars of funds and capital in order to make big loans to big-time commercial real estate borrowers. And you have to have good debt underwriting skills. So there is a professional skill involved in underwriting debt, understanding the risks associated with the collateral, and being willing to lend in cases where the collateral seems secure and your risk manageable. Now, a recent innovation in debt markets has produced things called mortgage-backed securities, which allows any of us to buy a security which gives us the right to receive income which result from repayments on loans by a whole portfolio of commercial real estate borrowers. And the point of this is to manage that risk associated with repayment and in some cases severely limit it and minimize it. So what the objectives of this whole unit in commercial mortgage-backed securities is to get you conversational in what commercial mortgage-backed securities are and why secondary mortgage markets are necessary in the smooth functioning and efficiency of capital in the wider area of real estate investment. And we're going to specifically focus on commercial mortgage-backed securities. A lot of interest is in residential mortgage-backed securities. I will use those as an example, but I'm focused mainly on the rules and the structures of commercial mortgage-backed securities. So this is an exciting topic because it really has quite an importance after the 2007, 2008, 2009 global financial crisis, which is largely tied directly to the role of mortgage-backed securities. Now, for the most part, they were the residential mortgage-backed securities, but commercial mortgage-backed securities suffered a lot of the same problems that was discovered in residential mortgage-backed securities. So just to recap sort of the big story here, and I encourage everyone watching who has not seen The Big Short, that film or the book does a great job of exploring the risk that these securities were able to promulgate and the behaviors that led to our financial collapse and the Great Recession of 2007, 8, and 9. So the key thing here is to understand what a mortgage-backed security is. So we're going to introduce you to somebody that buys tons of mortgages, right? They buy mortgages from the lenders that initiated them. They will then have the right to receive all the payments from the borrowers of those mortgages. And what they do is slice all of those mortgages up into a pool such that individual buyers of tranches or slices of the overall mortgage pool are exposed to the risk of the whole pool itself, not an individual borrower or an individual piece of collateral. So the idea is that you then spread the risk around and you only lose all of your money, not if one individual borrower or individual piece of collateral goes bust and defaults, but if the whole pool has to go bust for you to lose all of your money. And so what that did was it really encouraged lenders, the ones with the underwriting skills, to not be as diligent in their underwriting because well, they could sell these mortgages on, and they didn't have to suffer the future risk associated with repayments. So we built a lot of moral hazard, so lenders could, the more mortgages they initiated, and we'll see this later on, the more money they made. So in the film, they show that mortgages were issued to dogs and dead people, and a whole host of really poor behavior that led to a lot of the mortgage debt being bad. So there was a lot more defaults than everyone expected, and it turned out that these securities had also been traded on, further distributed and further integrated into the financial system, and the private sector and the capital markets freaked out, and we had our global financial crisis. So what is a secondary mortgage market? So this is critical to understanding the role that commercial mortgage-backed securities play in commercial real estate investment markets. And I want to introduce you to three problems that existed before mortgage-backed securities became. So it's the three problems that inspired the innovation of a mortgage-backed security. So let's look at a traditional lender. So if we didn't have secondary mortgage markets, the lender would raise capital, and let's say they raised $500 million for lending, and that allowed them to underwrite, say, $10 million loans. Now, the lender's expertise, remember, is in underwriting, is in doing the due diligence associated with evaluating risk associated with repayment and collateral in the case of having to foreclose or being unable to receive the full principal back. Now, in this case, once they've issued all those loans and they have no more capital, the only thing they can do is sit back and collect the repayments. Now, that's not taking advantage of the underwriting skills that they have. So it's an inefficient structure. Now let's jump to another player in the market, a fixed income fund, so a pension fund. Now, they have lots of cash. So lots of us are investing in placing our money for retirement with pension funds, so they have a lot of capital, and they have a lot of long-term liabilities, especially fixed income and defined benefit pension funds. So they have to meet these long-term liabilities, and so these long-term liabilities really match well with a medium to long-term, low-risk income producing investment. And mortgages really fit that model quite well. So they're very attractive to pension funds. But pension funds, one, they're nonprofit organizations in most cases, so they can't own businesses or be their own business to do their own lending of their own capital. So they need to invest that capital with somebody that does have those skills. So how does their money flow to lenders into the mortgage markets? Finally, you have a geographical issue. Underwriting real estate involves local market knowledge. And so say like real estate markets in this hypothetical booming city are hot and everybody wants in, and if I'm going to lend to somebody and I want to be a lender, I want my money to be lent in a city where the markets are hot. But before deregulation in the 70s and 80s, only the lenders in that local area were allowed to lend to buyers in the area, or the way building societies worked outside the U.S., you generally had to be a member of that society for a while, meaning local member, before you could take out capital from the club. Now, let's assume booming city and old city exist, right? Booming cities market's booming, old cities market's flat, isn't tanking, but it's slow, and lenders are building up cash, and that capital is looking for a better investment than their own markets. So how does the old money in the old city that's looking for more profitable investment move to lend over to booming city? And the answer is a secondary mortgage market. So by having a secondary mortgage market, we provide solutions to all three of those dilemmas. We've got our two sources of capital from our fixed income funds and our investors that are looking for a better market or a more efficient market. So they're seeking returns. We have this capital seeking returns, and we have a lender seeking more capital so that he or she can profit off initiating more loans. So let me go through this diagram. It's slightly incomplete, so I'll go through it slowly. We have to start with our traditional lending relationship. And it is residential here. It's just the graphic that I was able to use. But these home buyers, we can call them, say they're investing for, to run a multifamily or a residential to let investment. So they buy a house. The house, remember, is importantly the collateral behind the loan that a lender is willing to issue to those buyers in order for them to make the purchase. So the money bag flows from the lender to the home buyer so that they can facilitate the purchase. Now, in exchange for the money bag today, the home buyers agree to make monthly payments for 25, 30, however many years, as specified in the contract, back to the lender in exchange for the money up front today. So there's your traditional primary mortgage market. Now, like I said, the lender's expertise is not being used if the lender is just sitting back collecting regular payments enough until they have enough capital again to relend. So what happens instead is that the lender finds it profitable to sell the loan, meaning sell the rights to receive the payments back from the original buyers, to, we're going to call them a middleman, or a conduit, as the technical term in commercial real estate. And in exchange, the middleman forks over a big bundle of cash as the upfront value of those mortgage loans that were initiated, and the correspondent lender then has recapitalized and can go and lend again. Now, who is the middleman? In the residential world, in the United States here, this is largely our federal agencies. So when you hear the term agency loan, it refers to a loan which is purchased by either the Federal National Mortgage Association or the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation, which Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are the typical ways that we refer to those. So they are big guarantors. They have criteria. If you conform to those criteria, you have issued, as a lender, you have issued a conforming loan, and then your loan is automatically purchased. So it's a very low risk form of lending. And you're immediately recapitalized as the lender. In the commercial world, these are mainly private banks. There's no federal agencies involved in commercial lending except for Freddie Mac does do a lot of large multifamily lending. So the commercial that sort of blends between residential and commercial can fall under agency ownership. But for the most part, I'm going to focus on the private investment bank or conduits, and conduits just being a simple synonym for middleman. Now, the skill of these conduits is to dice up the hundreds of mortgages that they buy and sell individual slices to investors in the capital markets that want exposure to real estate debt and want a risk, a package, in this case, that exposes them to hundreds and hundreds of mortgages, not just a single borrower and a single piece of collateral. They're exposed, so their repayments are based on the successful repayment from hundreds of borrowers and hundreds of pieces of collateral behind those loans. So their risk is diversified. They have a diversified portfolio of mortgages. So if you think of it, the lender specializes in underwriting and looking at a specific asset to minimize the risk associated with lending against a specific piece of collateral to a specific borrower. So they minimize risk through the underwriting process. The middleman further minimizes risk to the capital markets, which is the initial source of these money bags that flow through. So the secondary market, which is the capital markets, send the money bags to the middleman by buying the slices of the packaged mortgages. The middleman sends that money to the lender. The lender makes the loans to the home buyers to purchase the collateral. The payments go from the home buyers, in theory, to the lender, onto the middleman, and onto the capital markets. But as this diagram shows, that often the servicer sends it directly to the secondary market. So you can see that this middleman now minimizes the risk of repayment back by constructing a portfolio of mortgages, not just a single piece of collateral. And so that's a very important service, and as we'll see, each one of those involves profiting off that expertise and makes the system more efficient. Thanks for watching.